Michael Bedard attaches a great importance in finding the right composition for his paintings. A typical example for his work method that includes looking at a scene from different angles can be found in the creation of the piece, The Crossing. In the first study for the finished work, the scene represented by the title of the work is described. 4 ducks, a mother duck and her children, cross the road while a car approaches from the left. Only one of the ducklings, the second one, sees the car and realizes the approaching danger. Bedard shows the car lifting off from the ground at high speed and losing its grip on the pavement, indicating that it cannot stop in time and thus threatens to run over the ducks. The arrangement of the picture corresponds to our Western habit of seeing things. Because we read and write from left to right, we are used to a course of events that begins on the left and ends on the right. The ducks marching from left to right corresponds to our visual expectation. In addition, the light source in the picture, the car's headlights, is located to the upper left. For many centuries, the sun and other light sources have been placed in the upper left part of paintings. It is not astonishing that, in a painting by Bedard, only one of the figures involved realizes the threat. That not all perceive the environment correctly and think about their situation is already familiar from the previous work, Sitting Ducks. In that picture, only one of the 3 ducks perceives the bullet holes in the wall. In the second study, the omission of the car from the picture focuses our attention on the ducks. The indication of threat is not as clear and direct as it is in the first study. Now we cannot make out the car, but only the light, which merely signals a diffuse danger. In this representation, the viewer does not know from the beginning whether the car could stop in time. Only the arm gesture of the second duckling hints that a fatal event is imminent. This gesture was not necessary in the first study because the car's lack of contact with the road made it seem that it was traveling at high speed. The sweeping arm movements of the mother duck and her ducklings give the ducks in the second study a greater dynamic than in the first. The overall basic concept of the composition with its diagonals results in a highly dynamic picture. If Bedard had represented the crossing of the road by means of a horizontal street and ducks perpendicular to it, a much calmer, more static, and orderly effect would be created that would not correspond to the content of the scene and its dramatic implication for the ducks. Both diagonals from upper left to lower right, the road and the light, and from lower left to center right, the ducks, creates restlessness in the picture. In the next step, Bedard chooses a different viewpoint for the scene. Whereas the first 2 studies were observed from the first viewpoint, Bedard changes the perspective for the definitive painting and takes a different viewpoint across the road. This viewpoint does not provide a complete picture of the event, a car approaching the ducks, but merely enables the viewer to see a partial aspect, the ducks crossing the road. The consequence of this is evident in the drawing, which provides a basic concept for the final painting. In the first 2 studies, no immediate relationship to the ducks could be established in spite of the more comprehensive viewpoint, because we saw only their backs. In the new perspective, the ducks do not head away from the viewer but approach him and look in his direction. A more direct and personal contact to them can thus be established. In the new composition, the ducks march from right to left, against our viewing habit. This seems strange, and the viewer is more prone to think about what exactly is going on in the picture. This attention is necessary to allow us to discover the headlights of the approaching car in the eyes of the duck on the right, and to interpret it correctly. The new arrangement also turns the viewer into a perpetrator. He or she sees the ducks almost the way the driver of the car would just before the crash. In the previous composition, the viewer was merely a distanced and uninvolved onlooker of the scene, of the imminent accident. It is conspicuous that Bedard only represents 3 and not 4 ducks in the final version. He zooms in on the scene. There are a number of reasons for this. Limiting himself to 3 ducks allows these to be shown larger in the picture. The duck's increased size already enables Bedard to make the viewer feel closer to the ducks. The fourth duck would not significantly contribute to the content of the painting. It would march in step with the first two, and so would be superfluous. Bedard wants to depict the duck's perception rather than comprehensively document the event or even show the accident. Because the last duck stands at the right margin of the picture and not in the center, the viewer asks whether there are really only 3 ducks crossing the road or if it is only an excerpt of a larger event. This invitation to mentally grapple with the picture, what is really going on here, is characteristic of paintings by Bedard. A special feature of the third duckling is that it is not marching in step with the 2 others. It is the only one proceeding with its right leg and showing a different arm posture. This emphasizes the difference of this duck. Therefore, it is not surprising that it is just the one to realize the special situation of the approaching car. The variety of facial expressions and gestures of this third duck in the 3 figures shown shows that Bedard experimented intensively and played through different variants to find an adequate body language for the duck. The ordering principle in the composition is also interesting. From the 4 basic possibilities, scattering, concentration, grouping, and row, Bedard selects the row. The ducks file one after the other and look like a string of pearls. This ordering principle is the most rigid and stresses the intended depiction of a mindless action. If Bedard scattered the ducks across the painting, then each one would be responsible for itself, and it would not astonish us to see that at least one duck directing its full attention to crossing the road. The fact that it is not the first and eldest duck in the row that is attentive creates the element of surprise. There is an English expression, to have one's ducks in a row, which spontaneously comes to mind when looking at this picture. It means to be prepared for, quote, anything. In this painting, however, the ducks are not prepared for the threatening situation at all. After the final appearance of the figures is established, Bedard focuses on their proper 3-dimensional shaping. For this, the drawing is first designed spatially on a separate sheet of paper to obtain a first impression of the final appearance. A maquette is used to simulate the proper shadow effects of the car's headlights. These shadows are transferred to all the ducks, one after the other, and can be found in the finished picture. The final painting is made with acrylics on gesso board. The advantage of gesso board is that it is an extremely smooth surface, which shows no texture, as opposed, for example, to canvas. This makes it possible to obtain effects that cannot be achieved using textured surfaces. The ducks are first painted without 3-dimensional effects and then masked to allow the painting of the road and the background. This picture shows the raw painting. By applying several layers of acrylic paint and creating the 3-dimensional effects in the picture, the finished painting emerges. The clearly predominant color contrast in the crossing is the contrast between light and dark. It stresses the difference between the bright, illuminated ducks and the dark environment, and makes a spatial modeling of the ducks possible. This pronounced light and dark contrast reminds one of the chiaroscuro paintings by the Italian 16th century artist Caravaggio, who used light to emphasize those figures or parts of figures that he held to be essential and to keep the rest in darkness. He used this lighting technique to focus the viewer's attention on the aspects he wanted them to discover in the painting. Applying this concept to the crossing, the bright design of the ducks against the dark background enable them to step out of the darkness. Therefore, Bedard not only depicts the moment when the third duck sees the car, he also achieves something different. He makes the viewer feel as if he were in the situation of the startled driver who suddenly and unexpectedly sees in his headlights the ducks on the road in front of his car. The seemingly simple composed painting The Crossing, with only 3 figures, is clearly structured. The extreme close-up puts both vanishing points outside of the picture, past the upper left corner, and far outside the right margin. This leads the viewer to linger inside the picture, thus enabling him to fully experience the 3-dimensional illusion and the various textures in the surfaces of the ducks and the road. Whereas the simple composition initially leads one to believe that the depicted situation can be understood in a few moments, doubts arise the longer one stays with the picture. The viewer recognizes the strong illumination of the asphalt in front of the ducks, sees shadows cast by the ducks, and asks himself why one of the ducks is looking to the right. When one sees the reflection of light in the eyes of the third duck, one correctly grasps the gravity of the situation. The painting's brilliant technique already makes it a special work. But Bedard, again and again, succeeds in initiating an intellectual process in the viewer that leads to a revision of the initial carefree impression, which gives his work a very high quality.